Hello everyone, I hope you're all well. In this video I'm going to show you how to draw a realistic pencil eye using graphite pencils. So if you want to learn how to do this, just follow my step-by-step process. To complete this activity you will need an A4 sheet of paper, a HB pencil, 4B pencil, rubber, sharpener, ruler and a piece of tissue and a cotton bud. So if you find yourselves these items now and then continue the lesson. So when we come to draw the eye, we need to think about these key areas. The upper eyelid, the pupil, which is the black dot in the middle, the iris, the colourful ring around the pupil. The white of the eye is also known as the sclera. This is a proper scientific word for it. We've got eyelashes that help to protect our eyeballs. The lower eyelid, so as well as an upper eyelid, we've also got a lower eyelid which helps to meet in the middle to seal off the eye. And lastly we've got the tear duct in the corner. So you'll notice one corner of the eye protrudes a little bit more than the other, and this is where you find the tear duct and the muscle. Today I've selected a reference photo for us all to draw, but if you were to do this activity by yourselves, you must make sure to choose a reference photo that has high contrast. This means that the dark areas are extremely dark and the light areas are completely white. This high contrast is going to create a three-dimensional and realistic looking eye. Your picture, your drawing, will only ever be as good as your reference photo, so make sure it's nice and clear and all in focus. So today this is the eye that we are going to have a go at doing. I can see a light reflection in there which adds contrast. Everything is in focus, so it's not too blurry. We've got lots of details that we can add. So I'm going to show you step by step how to achieve this eye. Now this is my drawing of this eye. So you can see here all the different techniques I've used, and I'm going to break it down step by step what I did to achieve this outcome. First of all, on your A4 paper, using a ruler, I want you to draw out a box 17 centimeters by 10 centimeters. This shape is just so that we get our eye the right size. You need to draw the shape that you see below using light lines. So the shape that we can see below is like a squashed lemon shape. So one corner comes out a little bit more than the other. Please make sure to bring out the inner corner on the right side, not the left side, like the image on the screen. When sketching, try to use a HB pencil. If you sketch using a 4B pencil, it gets very muddy, doesn't it? It gets very smudged easily. So use a HB pencil for now, just to map out your shapes, and then we'll use a 4B pencil later on when we start to add our tones. Now this bit is really important, and it helps when I come to mark it. If I can see a perfect circle for an iris, it means you've done a really good job and you get higher marks. If your iris is looking squashed or wobbly or not circular, then it lowers the grade. So inside that eye shape, that lemon shape, we need a perfect circle. And the top of the circle should be slightly hidden by the upper eyelid. Then you need another perfect circle inside this first circle, and it should be roughly a third of the size of the first circle. So this is going to be your pupil. I'm going to show you how I drew mine out, and then you can come back to this. So I've got my rectangle drawn out here, and I'm using my HB pencil to lightly draw out the shape of the eye. Now if you look at the top left hand picture, you'll see the red line around the area that I'm sketching out. Now if you look really closely at this shape, it's not where the eyelashes come to, but it's the edge of the eyelids. So it's where the eyelid meets the white of the eye. That's the shape that I'm drawing out now. We've got that usual lemon shape with the inner corner coming out slightly to the right and downwards to make an accurate looking eye. Now here I'm starting to draw out my iris. Now if we look at the original reference photo, you'll notice that the iris is slightly hidden at the top underneath the upper eyelid, but at the bottom there's a small gap between the bottom of the iris and the lower eyelid. So make sure you position your iris exactly where it needs to be. There shouldn't be any white of the eye at the top. It should be hidden by the eyelid. Now the iris needs to be a completely perfect circle, and the easiest way to do this is to sketch out your circle and then turn your paper different orientations. By doing this, it allows your brain to unscramble the shape and identify the areas that you need to smooth out more. So keep turning your paper and make it a perfect circle. So smooth it all out, get rid of those lumps and bumps, and it should be a nice perfect circle. Mine ended up going a little bit too dark, so I ended up rubbing it out and just drawing it back in ever so lightly, because you don't want your pencil lines to be too dark. We only need basic light outlines for this task so far. The entire time you are drawing your eye, you need to keep looking at your reference photo. Now I noticed that my iris was slightly too big for the eyeball, so I'm just going back through that shape, making it ever so slightly smaller to fit the proportions of the eye. And now I'm rubbing out that outer circle just to correct it all. Now if you look closely at the reference photo, you'll notice that the bottom of the iris does not touch the lower eyelid. There's a bit of a gap there, and when I originally drew my iris, that gap was very, very small. By thinning down the shape a little bit, just carving off the edges, I've managed to keep that gap the size that it needs to be. Make sure you've got a sharp pencil when you're doing these outlines, and try not to get them too fluffy. So keep your pencil lines nice and light. Now the pupil needs to be exactly in the centre of the iris, and it needs to be a complete circle as well. So keep turning your paper to make sure it's all perfect. You should have drawn out your lemon shape and your iris and pupil. Next we are going to draw a small square shape halfway between the two circles. This is going to be the light reflection. We're then going to draw an upper eyelid. I'm now just drawing out the crease in the upper eyelid, right across, curving it around. It's a lot closer to the edge of the eyelid in the outer corner than it is on the inner corner. On the lower eyelid there's a bit of a ledge where the eyelashes begin, so I'm just starting to draw that out roughly, leaving a bit of a gap between the edge of the eyelid so I know where to place things in future. I'm also drawing in the inner eyelids in the left hand corner. When we look closely at the pupil and the iris in the eye, we'll notice there's a light reflection in there. If you can get a light reflection into your eye, it makes it really stand out because it adds contrast. Now to make this look as realistic as possible, we must get the shapes the exact same. Now if I look at this reflective light area, it looks almost like a window shape. I can see 3 different rectangles in there. So I'm just starting to draw that out. And it does overlap the pupil, so I have to rub out the top half of the pupil too. The last little bit we need to draw in is the tear duct. So this is where you see a little bit of muscle in the eye. This is what helps it move about. For the next step, we want to get as many different patterns, tones and textures into the iris as possible. The more details you get into this area, the better your eye is going to look. Now we're going to swap to a 4B pencil and start to add some shading. Make sure you've got a scrap bit of paper to rest your hand on as it stops your pencil from smudging, and you want to use all 10 tones in this area. So now I've got my basic shapes outlined lightly in HB pencil. I'm now swapping to a 4B pencil, which is going to allow for a wider variety of tones. I'm starting in the pupil area as this is the darkest of the tones that I'm going to need. And I'm going to apply a tone 10 to this area. So I'm pressing down really, really hard, nice sharp pencil, and you should be pressing down to the point where it almost looks shiny because it's so dark. Take your time with this, don't rush it. Pay lots of attention to the reference photo to identify where you need to place your different tones. At the top of the iris, I can see it's very, very dark, but there's a small area of some really light highlights. So I'm just making those little shapes now, and then I can continue to blend out and add more tones using my pencil. The best eye drawings will be the ones with lots of contrast in them. Contrast is created when you place very dark tones next to contrasting light tones, like we have with the highlights. So make sure not to go into the highlights. These need to be completely white for now, and continue to blend out your tones throughout the rest of your iris. Keep looking back to your reference photo. As you can see in the image, there is a darker ring around the outside of the iris. So I'm applying those tones first, and then I'm going to start and add different shapes, lines and patterns to add detail into the iris. Everybody's iris is completely unique to themselves. No patterns are the same as somebody else's, so really do get as much detail, as many different lines, patterns that you can get into the iris as possible, and make sure that you're using a sharp pencil to do this. When adding lines to your iris, always make sure they're going in the direction from the centre of your pupil to the outside ring. Focus on getting a variety of different line techniques into this drawing. So could you apply some thin lines, thick lines, dark lines, light lines, straight lines, wavy lines, broken lines. So keep filling your iris in, keep looking at your reference photo to guide you on where to place your different tones. Try and keep it as neat as possible, but it doesn't have to be completely perfect at the moment. You may notice that there are some almost like holes in the iris, so try and draw these in if you can. You don't have to use this step if you don't want to, but I find it really helps to smooth out the surface. So I've just got a cotton bud here. I'm just going through it all and blending those tones together. By doing this though, it does diminish quite a bit of detail, so we have to re-put it in. I'm then going to cut off the corner of a rubber to get a really sharp edge. Using that very sharp edge of the rubber, I'm then pushing into the pencil work to get some highlights in there, and follow that same direction of the lines from the centre of the pupil to the outside ring of the eye. Looking at my reference photo, I also noticed that there are some highlights almost curving around the outer part of the iris. So I'm just starting to add these in. It's just going to add a bit more of a reflective tone to it, and it's going to make our eye look more realistic and 3D. Once those tones have been blended together and you've added some highlights using the rubber, I'm now going in with a really sharp 4B pencil once again to really break up those tones, add some more lines, different types of lines again. The wider variety of lines you've got, the better it's going to be. Keep looking at your reference photo. Any little dots, try to add them in if you can. It doesn't have to be in the exact same place, as it's going to be really tricky, but please do add as many as you can, as this is going to really help. Now when it comes to the highlights, if you look closely at the reference photo, you'll notice that the white in the highlights isn't completely white in all areas. So I'm just taking that cotton bud once again, starting to blend it out. It's only going to be a tone 1, nothing darker than that. I'm then using my sharp 4B pencil to just go back over those outlines to make it really contrasting. Looking into the reflective areas, you can see some of the eyelash detail. So with a sharp pencil, I'm adding those lashes in. The more detail you can get into this, the better it's going to be. You should have drawn out the basic shape of an eye using the reference image that was given to you. And you should have also started to add some tones, details and mark making techniques to the iris to give it that intense detail and contrast. Now today we're going to be completing the rest of the eye, so we're going to be focusing on adding tones to the skin, the inner corner where we have the tear duct, and the white of the eye as well. So just a reminder, this is our reference photo and you will need this today's lesson to keep referring back to. Now these are some really strong eye studies that I found off the internet. What makes these really good is the contrast that has been added. The dark tones are incredibly dark, completely jet black, and you can achieve this by using a 4B pencil or a 6B pencil if you want it to go even darker. We've also got really light tones in there where we find the highlights. If you notice, the reflective highlighted areas within the iris and the pupil are completely white to add that highlight and contrast to the eye. This helps to give it definition and makes it look like a watery reflective surface. We've also got lots of midtones in the eye, especially around the skin and in the crease, that have been blended really thoroughly to give it that dimension and shape. We've also got lots of detail in the iris. Look at all the different lines that are in there, the different shapes that we can see. We can see a crow in the top right hand one. Lots of beautiful tonal work and details and mark making techniques is what's going to get you a really strong eye. So today we are going to start and add tones to the skin around the eye. We're then going to add a bit of texture, and eyelashes should always be drawn last because we don't want to blend out or smudge any of that beautiful detail that we've managed to get into each eyelash. So we're now going to start and add some tone to this skin. If you look really closely at the image, the white of the eye is mostly a tone 0 as there's nothing there, it's completely white. But if we look at the skin surrounding the eyeball itself, it is like a tone 1 and a tone 2 in some areas, maybe even a tone 4, 5 and 6 in the darker shadows. So start to outline and add some shading to the edge of the eyelid, and then I'm going to start and add some tones to the crease. The crease is probably the darkest part around the eye itself, so I'm going to try and use a tone 9 for this area and blend it out. So you can see here I'm blending out using the side of my pencil. It's easier to keep your shading neater by using the side of your pencil than the very tip of it, as it just helps to blend out that line a little bit more. The darker areas on the upper eyelid are found on the outer corners, so the outer corner and the inner corner. So I keep applying different layers of pencil work to these areas to really build up the tone. This is going to help define the shape of the eye and make it look round and 3D. To get a smoother blend of tones on the skin, I'm wrapping my finger around a small bit of tissue and using this to blend the tones together. Try and focus on using circular motions so you don't get any dark marks. I'm then going back into that crease with a really sharp pencil to really help define that line. I wanted to blend out the tones in the crease a little bit more, but not so far. This is why I chose to use a cotton bud, as it keeps the blending in a certain area. Here you can see I'm starting to change the direction of my lines to show the form of the eye and the texture in the upper eyelid. Just remember that any areas you blend out with a tissue or cotton bud, it will lose all the detail, so you will need to go back into it again. You want to keep the shading on the lower eyelid really delicate around here. There's no distinctive outline where the eyelashes come from, we just marked it in ever so slightly to help us with the next few steps. So make sure to blend this area out using a cotton bud or a tissue. You may notice here that there's a bit of a dark mark where I've blended out. Now this is where I've placed my finger by accident on the paper, and the combination of pencil and the blending using a tissue has made the pencil stick to the oil in my fingerprint. If this happens, just rub it out and add some more pencil over the top. I'm now starting to add some tones to the white of the eye. Now even though the white of the eye is white, if we leave it completely white it's just going to look flat. So here I'm just adding a light bit of shading around the edges of the eyeball. The darkest shadows on the white of the eye are found in the top left corner, as you can see here where I'm blending out the darker tones. As you're adding shading to the white of the eye, try and keep the centre free of any kind of pencil work there, because we want to create that really harsh contrast between the light and the dark from the iris and the white of the eye. So keep the centre of the eye nice and white, just add your shading around the edges. I'm now starting to add some shade into the tear duct. Now if you look close at the tear duct, there's quite a few highlights in there to show that it's, a wet surface, it's quite watery. So really do take time to add that contrast into this area. When adding shade into the edges and the outlines, always make sure you've got a really sharp pencil. This is going to keep your lines nice and precise. And you can see here that I'm using a process of applying a bit of pencil, blending it out with a cotton bud, and then going back in with the sharp rubber to add those contrasting highlights. Once you've added some tonal shade into the white of the eye, you'll then be able to see where you need to go darker around the skin. So here I'm just adding some more shadows, some more deeper, darker tones around the corners of the eye. So far I've got a really good strong eye drawing. It's got lots of different tones and the shapes and proportions are all correct. Now when we draw an eye, we always leave the eyelashes to last, because if we were to do the eyelashes and then go back into the skin and blend it out, it would blend out all that lovely precise detail and line work that we've got in the eyelashes. So always leave your eyelashes till very last. Now you can see here I've got a very sharp pencil, and I'm drawing each eyelash one by one. I'm taking my time with each eyelash, I'm not rushing it. When you draw the eyelashes, you want to look really closely at the angle and the direction that each lash goes. Now you won't get each eyelash perfect compared to the photo, but try and get the placement as right as you can. Eyelashes can be really tricky, but notice how the outer corner of the eye, the eyelashes are much longer and are more curved. Towards the centre of the eye, the eyelashes come straight out at us. That's why they seem a lot shorter and we can't see them. Towards the inner corner of the eye, as you can see here, they're flicking back the other direction, and towards the inner eye as well, the eyelashes appear a lot shorter. A general rule for drawing eyelashes is if it's on the left side of the eye, it needs to point left. If it's on the right side of the eye, it needs to point right. So make sure you are curving to the right direction, otherwise your eye can look flat. So here I'm just going back into those gaps and filling them up a little bit. Notice how all the eyelashes are pointing different directions. They overlap one another. They're not uniform by, the way that they are laid out. So just randomize it. Have some angled up, some angling a bit further down, and layer them over each other. Now I've plotted in where my eyelashes are going to go, and now I've just sharpened my pencil. I'm just going back over those lines, pressing down a lot harder to thicken those up. The base of the eyelash should be the thickest part of that lash. It should then get a lot thinner towards the end of the lash line. In the photo, I can see that the left-hand corner is slightly blurred due to the photograph, so I'm just adding a little bit of smudging using a cotton bud here just to blur out those lines and tones. I'm now starting to add the lower lashes. The lower lashes should be a little bit shorter than the upper lashes and less of them. Again, you need to follow that rule for eyelashes. So if it's on the left side of the eye, it needs to point left. If it's on the right side of the eye, it needs to point right. Try to overlap them. Sometimes your lower lashes tend to clump together. So you might have one strand, but it's actually made up of 3 or 4 eyelashes. So just randomise your layout of the lashes. They tend to get a little bit shorter as they go towards the inner corner of the eye. Look closely at where I am drawing my bottom row of eyelashes from. Quite a few students in the past have drawn their eyelashes on the bottom row coming straight from the edge of the eyelid. Now if you look closely at the picture, there's a bit of a ledge there. That's what we drew in right at the start to help guide us with this. So we've got that ledge. There should be no eyelashes on that ledge. It should be clear. This is where your eye creates a seal when you close it. A little bit down from this, that's where your eyelashes start. So once again, I've sharpened my pencil and I'm going back over those lines to thicken up the lashes. Once you've completed the lashes, you don't want to add too much further detail to the eye over the pencil work that we've just done over the lashes. So just keep it fairly simple, not too much blending. So I'm just adding a little bit more pencil work, just getting those lines in where I can see the texture of the skin. This is only in some select areas, I'm not going over all of the eye. Here you can see my eye is just about finished, and this is the most important part. You now want to look at your eye drawing and look back at your reference photo. Are there any differences? Can you spot any differences between the two? Anything that's different, so you might have some darker tones in the original picture, you might have some more highlights that you've not yet added. Use this time now to really get those details in, as this is what's going to make your eye drawing look much more accurate. Here I noticed that there was quite a lot of highlights on the bottom ledge of the eyelid, so I just rubbed out a bit of the shade in there and reapplied the eyelashes. Now the last little bit of detail I want to get into the eye is the veins that we can see in the white of the eye. Now when you come to do this, keep your placement really accurate, and your lines need to be really light. So start off with really faint light lines, and then I'm just using the tip of a cotton bud to blend those bits of pencil work out. So once again, here's your reference image. Are there any differences between this and your drawing? And hopefully by the end of the 3 hours that you've had of art this week, you should have an eye drawing that looks something similar to this.